The Johnson family had always led an uneventful life in their modest suburban home. Their evenings were routine: dinner together, a little conversation, and then settling down in the living room for their favorite TV shows. On one particular rainy night, however, this peaceful normalcy was about to unravel in the most terrifying way. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Mr. Johnson sat in his recliner, flipping through the channels. Emily, their teenage daughter, was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, while Mrs. Johnson was knitting by the fireplace. The glow of the television and the rhythmic tapping of rain on the windows made for a cozy scene. But then, the TV flickered. At first, it seemed like a small glitch. The channel they were watching cut to static for a brief moment before returning. Mr. Johnson sighed, thinking it was just the storm interfering with the signal. But the TV flickered again, and this time it didn't return to the show. Instead, the static gave way to a grainy black and white image. The family stared in confusion as the screen displayed an eerily familiar scene: their living room. It was unmistakable: the couch, the coffee table, the family portrait above the mantel. Everything was identical to their current surroundings. "Is this some kind of hidden camera thing?" Emily asked nervously, sitting up. "Don't be ridiculous," Mr. Johnson replied, though his voice wavered. "Probably a neighbor's security camera bleeding into the signal." But then, the image on the screen shifted. The camera now showed the hallway outside their living room. It was empty, but the flickering static seemed to carry a faint, almost human-like whisper. Suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared at the far end of the hallway on the screen. Its form was blurry and indistinct, but its presence sent a chill through the room. "Who the hell is that?" Mrs. Johnson whispered, her knitting forgotten in her lap. Without a word, Mr. Johnson grabbed a flashlight and stood up. "I'll check it out. Stay here." He marched into the hallway, shining the light into every corner. The corridor was empty, just as it should have been. Still, unease settled over him like a heavy fog. When he returned, the TV's static had resumed. But before anyone could speak, the camera angle changed again. This time, it showed the kitchen. The family gasped as the screen displayed the fridge door swinging open by itself. Groceries spilled onto the floor, and the shadowy figure stood silently in the corner of the frame, unmoving. A loud crash echoed from the kitchen, making Mrs. Johnson scream. They rushed to investigate, only to find the kitchen spotless and the fridge securely closed. Yet as they returned to the living room, the TV continued its broadcast. The screen now showed the front door. The shadowy figure was outside, its vague outline pulsating slightly, as if breathing. "Turn it off!" Mrs. Johnson demanded, panic rising in her voice. Mr. Johnson grabbed the remote and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. He tried again, this time mashing every button, but the TV stayed on. The figure on the screen moved closer to the front door. The sound of static grew louder, interspersed with faint, distorted whispers that almost sounded like their names. "Call the police," Emily urged, her voice breaking. But their phones were dead. No signal, not even static on the landline. The screen flickered again, now showing Emily's bedroom upstairs. The shadowy figure stood by her desk, rifling through her belongings with deliberate, jerky movements. Emily burst into tears. "How is it in my room? It's not real. It can't be real." Panic set in as the family decided to leave. They ran to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Mr. Johnson threw his weight against it, but it felt like it had been welded shut. Every window was the same, unyielding to their frantic efforts. Then the TV changed again. The camera now showed the back of their heads, as if someone, or something, was standing in the room with them. The whispers grew louder, becoming incomprehensible chants. Cold air swept through the living room, carrying the faint stench of decay. Slowly, the Johnsons turned around. Their screams were swallowed by the static. The next morning, their neighbors noticed the house was eerily silent. The family's car was still in the driveway, but no one answered the door. Days turned into weeks, and the house remained unoccupied. Some claimed they could see faint, flickering lights from the living room window late at night. Others swore they heard faint whispers and static when walking by. Years later, new residents moved in. The strange occurrences began again. Flickering TVs, shadowy figures, and missing neighbors. It became known as the house that no one stayed in for long. And on stormy nights, the faint hum of static could still be heard, carrying with it the last terrified screams of the Johnson family. Mark had always dreamed of recognition, of his art being appreciated by an audience that truly understood the depth of his work. But reality had been far from kind. With no sales in months, a dwindling savings account, and a landlord growing less patient by the day, he was on the brink of giving up. His studio, once a sanctuary, had become a prison where unfinished canvases stared at him accusingly. When the envelope arrived, it felt like a lifeline. The elegant parchment, embossed with gold, read, "You are cordially invited to an exclusive showing at the Gallery of Shadows. Discover inspiration among the works of others like yourself. Midnight, Warehouse District, Building 13. There was no address, no RSVP details, just a date and time. Normally, Mark would have ignored such a cryptic invitation, but desperation made him curious. When the night arrived, Mark found himself wandering the deserted streets of the Warehouse District. A heavy fog hung low, muffling his footsteps. Building 13 was a decrepit structure with shattered windows and a rusted metal door. Yet, inside, it was breathtaking, a stark contrast to its exterior. Candlelight illuminated the space, casting dancing shadows across ornate gilded frames. The crowd inside was elegant but silent, their expressions neutral, almost cold. Mark quickly noticed their strange behavior. They didn't speak, didn't move unnecessarily, just gazed at the paintings as if hypnotized. Uneasy, he decided to focus on the artwork. Each painting was disturbingly vivid. A businessman, his body twisted grotesquely, trapped beneath a collapsed bridge. A woman frozen mid-scream as shadowy figures pulled her into the depths of a dark forest. A child, wide-eyed, reaching out as flames engulfed their small form. The longer Mark stared, the more details he noticed. The way the light seemed to shift on the canvas, the subtle movements in the painted figures, as though they were alive. He felt a chill crawl up his spine when he recognized the face in one painting. It was Sarah, a friend from his early days as an artist. She had gone missing years ago, her disappearance a mystery that had haunted him. Her painted face was twisted in agony, her hands clawing at invisible chains. "Mark," a voice whispered. He turned sharply, but no one was there. The whisper came again, this time from deeper within the gallery. Compelled by some unseen force, he followed the sound. In the final room, he froze. The painting on the far wall was unmistakably him. His face stared back in a lifelike depiction, but the scene was horrifying. He was slumped over his easel, a palette knife buried in his chest, blood pooling beneath him. Behind him in the painting, his reflection smirked cruelly, holding the knife. The longer Mark stared, the more the painting changed. The smirking reflection began to move, turning its head slowly toward him. The painted version of himself started to convulse, his painted eyes filling with terror. Mark spun around, but the room was empty, or so he thought. A figure stepped out from the shadows. The collector. Tall, thin, and draped in black, his face was obscured by a mask that resembled a blank canvas. "True art demands sacrifice," the collector said in a voice that was both soft and commanding. Mark backed away, only to find that the walls of the gallery had shifted. The entrance was gone, replaced by more paintings. Each one now featured the same sinister smirk he had seen in his reflection. The collector gestured toward Mark's painting. Your masterpiece awaits." Mark tried to run, but the ground beneath him seemed to tilt, pulling him toward the canvas. The painted version of himself reached out from the frame, its bloody hand breaking the surface of the painting. He screamed as the hand grabbed his wrist, yanking him forward. His vision blurred, and the last thing he saw was the collector watching silently as he was pulled into the canvas. When Mark awoke, he was no longer in the gallery, but within the painting itself. He could see the gallery through the canvas, his own reflection, now the smirking figure. He banged against the invisible barrier, but no sound escaped. Days later, the gallery vanished, and Mark was declared missing. A new exhibit appeared in another city, with a fresh collection of paintings. Among them was a piece titled "The Forgotten Artist," depicting a man trapped in his studio, staring out at the viewer, his eyes filled with despair. Some visitors claimed to hear faint banging from inside the frame, but the gallery attendants dismissed it as an overactive imagination. The gallery always moved on, leaving behind only whispers of its existence, and the collectors promised to return for more artists. When Liam and Nora stumbled upon the old Victorian house during their house-hunting escapades, it felt like fate. Perched on a hill overlooking the forest, it had an undeniable charm, a relic from another era, with intricate woodwork, stained glass windows, and a sprawling garden that begged to be revived. Though it was old and creaky, the price was irresistible, and they envisioned themselves filling the space with laughter, life, and memories. But from the moment they stepped inside, an undercurrent of unease wove itself into their joy. It wasn't the flickering lights or the faint smell of damp wood. It wasn't even the occasional groan of the house settling late at night. It was the door. At the end of the upstairs hallway, a single door stood locked. Unlike the other rooms, it had no visible keyhole, just a rusted knob that wouldn't turn. Liam joked about it, dubbing it the mystery room, while Nora felt an instinctive aversion to it. "Maybe it's just storage," Liam suggested as they tried key after key to no avail. "Then why seal it up like this?" Nora countered, her voice tinged with discomfort. The locksmith they hired arrived with a toolbox and left with wide eyes, muttering something about an unusual mechanism and advising them to leave it alone. They laughed it off at first, chalking it up to the house's quirks, but the door's presence lingered in their minds. As weeks passed, strange occurrences began to escalate. They heard faint sounds at night, soft tapping and muffled whispers. Once, while dusting, Nora thought she heard a child's giggle from behind the door. She froze, heart pounding, and quickly dismissed it as her imagination. One rainy evening, they returned home to find the door slightly ajar, though they swore they'd left it locked. Cautiously they approached, peering inside. The room was a child's nursery, frozen in time. Dust blanketed the floor and cobwebs draped across an old crib, a rocking horse, and shelves filled with tarnished toys. But what struck them most were the walls, covered in faded wallpaper, peeling in places to reveal chaotic scribbles underneath. Words like "get out," "not safe," and "don't wake them" clawed their way through the faded floral print. In the center of the room sat a small wooden rocking horse, swaying gently as though an invisible child had just dismounted. Nora shivered. "This isn't right, Liam. We need to leave." But leaving wasn't so simple. Over the next few days, the room began asserting its presence in their lives. The door would unlock itself at odd hours, standing wide open as though inviting them inside. The once dusty toys seemed to move, subtly shifting positions each time they looked. And the scribbled warnings on the walls grew sharper, fresher, as if someone, or something, was actively writing them anew. Then came the nightmares. Both Liam and Nora began dreaming of the room. Liam dreamt of clawing at its walls, its toys staring lifelessly, their eyes glowing in the dim light. Nora dreamt of standing in the doorway, watching shadows stretch from the corners of the room, to consume her husband. One night, Nora woke to find the rocking horse from the nursery sitting at the foot of their bed. That was the breaking point. Liam decided the room had to go. Armed with a sledgehammer, he stormed upstairs. Nora begged him to stop, but he was resolute. As he swung at the walls, a piercing wail erupted, filling the house. The door slammed shut behind him, locking Nora out. She pounded on the door, screaming his name, but it wouldn't budge. Inside, Liam's blows seemed to have no effect. The walls absorbed each swing, and the air grew thick and stifling. "Let me out," Liam shouted, his voice muffled. Then, silence. When the door finally creaked open, Nora found the room empty. Liam was gone. The toys were untouched, except for one addition, a crumpled child's drawing on the floor. It depicted a crude figure of Liam, his face twisted in anguish, surrounded by shadowy figures with long, spindly arms. Nora fled that night, leaving everything behind. She never looked back, but the memory of the room haunted her dreams. The house eventually sold again, its secrets carefully concealed. And when the new owners found the locked door at the end of the hallway, they felt the same curiosity, the same pull, and made the same mistake. For the room waits patiently, its walls whispering, its toys watching. It has all the time in the world, and every victim becomes part of its collection, their stories etched into the peeling wallpaper for the next unwitting soul to discover.